Alright, welcome back everyone. I hope you guys are doing fine, and tonight we have why 80s movies look and feel different. Now, I don't think I've watched, too many 80s movies, outside of like the Rocky franchise. But I don't know. Maybe there's a few in there.
Music, Michael Jackson,
that,
cocaine.
Okay, yeah, Scarface, yeah, I did. Okay, the Terminator, yeah, Back in the Future, okay, yeah.
It's what I call the 80s movie feel. They emanate nostalgia. I wasn't even born in the 80s. I was born in the 90s, yet there's something about 80s movies that gives me that feeling of nostalgia. And in this video, we're going to take a deep dive and try to determine what makes 80s movies feel like 80s movies. But before we dive in, I want to ask all of you to lightly press that subscribe button to stay up to date on more great movie, Hollywood, and film industry related content. Okay, let's get started. The first and probably most obvious reason why 80s movies have that certain feel to them is because of their music.
Yeah, the music in the 80s, that was fire.
The 80s were the decade of the synthesizer. At the time, the synth was still in its infancy, and people were getting so excited about digital music that it was being used in a ton of different places. From Blade Runner to the iconic score and soundtrack of Scarface, the synth was everywhere during the 80s. And while movies from the 70s were filled with music from genres like funk, soul, pop, hard rock, soft rock, and disco, the synthesizer screamed the 80s style and aesthetic. And when the 90s arrived, they seemed to have ditched the traditional synth sound of the 80s for more orchestral and grand scores. Good examples of this are Jurassic Park, Titanic, and Home Alone. But aside from the music, the 80s were the decade right before we saw surround sound as we know it today.
Okay.
Yeah, in the 80s we had better audio quality being used in movies with THX becoming a thing, but we didn't have proper 5.1 or 7.1 or whatever sound available. Surround sound of the late 70s and 80s was only a 4-channel system. And during this time we still saw audio being recorded to an analog medium, like a tape, because digital audio was not yet widely available. The introduction of digital audio offered much more fidelity, and the difference between audio recorded digitally and on analog is pretty significant. Now, I'm not saying that 80s movies sound bad, but they have a more tinny, lower dynamic range kind of sound. Now that, combined with the explosions and sound effects of 80s blockbusters, often resulted in audio that was sometimes blown out.
Yeah, that's what I'm like. It just felt like, bro, it felt really loud. Like, it's like, oh, it was brutal. Like the sound, especially the explosions, like the punches, bro.
Especially when
like I was watching a clip, last night of Rocky 4, like when Drago killed Apollo, like that kill punch, he put on Apollo, bro, like that right there just sounded like a whole explosion, man. Like
side of a movie theater. The synth-heavy music, along with blockbusters that would almost require surround sound but didn't get it, is one of the main reasons 80s movies feel different, at least in the sound department. The 80s are basically the golden age of practical effects. With the release of the original Star Wars in 1977, practical effects took off like never before and ushered in a decade with some truly amazing uses of them. Movies like The Thing, The Never-Ending Story, E.T., and Raiders of the Lost Ark are just some examples of the amazing ways practical effects could be used in movies to tell a story. This use of practical effects is fairly obvious.
What did he say?
The Never-Ending Story, E.T., and Raiders of the Lost Ark are just some examples of the amazing ways practical effects could be used in movies to tell a story. This use of practical effects is fairly obvious when watching those movies today, compared to the CGI and digital effects of modern cinema. Up until the late 90s and the mainstream adoption of CGI, practical effects and animatronics were one of the main ways filmmakers could help tell their story. From characters we grew to love like E.T. and the Gremlins to some really scary and disturbing stuff like the monster from The Thing, practical effects were bringing to life some of the most iconic scenes and characters. Today, we're moving back to using more practical effects and animatronics, but the 80s had a certain feel that is hard to explain when it comes to this. I would explain it as somewhat grimy and even scary feeling. Man, when I was a kid, E.T. scared the living daylights out of me, and it was basically a children's movie.
Yeah, like those characters, those monster characters, they did feel like really scary. They still do feel scary.
Doing research for this video, I went down a few rabbit holes trying to find out why 80s movies have that certain look to them. And one of the main reasons people seem to think 80s movies feel like 80s movies is because of their grainy, somewhat blown out visuals. I found many forums and blog posts either asking or teaching people how to get that look today. And it's true. 80s movies have a certain grainy look to them. But I would go one step further and say that their color has a lot to do with the way they feel. 80s movies were still being shot on film, and like I mentioned earlier, a lot of effects were done practically, and the color grading was done in camera. That's why they tend to have a more realistic color palette than what we see today. Movies after the 80s started making extensive use of color grading. When you think of The Matrix, the first color that probably comes to your head is green. Mad Max Fury Road, orange and blue. There's even an ongoing joke in the film community that if you want to make your videos look more cinematic, apply an orange and teal color grade to them, which was most likely a result of Michael Bay's influence on Hollywood and action films. Modern movies almost always have some sort of color grading applied to them that adds to the overall look and feel of a movie, but 80s movies had a more natural look. Even when there were crazy effects being shown on screen, everything had a more neutral and realistic color palette. You can see that a lot of the colors in movies from that time were a direct result from the lighting used to light the scene versus a color grading being applied to them after the fact. And yes, 80s films are oftentimes grainy, but I think there's a common misconception because of the amount of music videos that were actually grainy compared to the movies. And movies before the 80s also had that same film grainy look to them. I think that color had a big part to play in the look and feel of them. The fact that we were now seeing such big Hollywood spectacles with amazing, over-the-top special effects, but still a more natural color palette added to the 80s feel. For example, take a look at the original Blade Runner from 1982. Yeah, it's filled with lots of colors, neon lighting, and a darker overall tone, yet it still has a natural look to it as opposed to the more color graded and stylistic look of Blade Runner 2049.
Yeah, that's true.
The 80s definitely got style. It's something that in recent years we've tried to replicate. Top Gun, The Breakfast Club, Scarface, Footloose, Flashdance, Dirty Dancing, and Back to the Future are just some of the movies that come to mind when we think 80s style. From white t-shirts with casual denim jeans that had a torn knee, to women wearing leotards for working out, or their loose-fitting sweater pullovers with their frizzy hair. From bomber jackets to colorful, white, and patterned suits with a mandatory top few buttons left unbuttoned, these styles scream the 80s. There isn't much to say about the topic of style other than the 80s had it. And whether it was the 80s style that influenced the decade's movies, or the movies that influenced the style, I'm not sure. But there's something distinctly 80s and nostalgic about the style from those times. 80s movies took marketing and product placement to the next level. From the Ray-Bans Tom Cruise wore in Top Gun, to the Reese's Pieces we saw in E.T., to the front and center Nike shoes in Back to the Future, the 80s were filled with it. So much so that Stranger Things, that is based in the 80s, went on to mimic the style from that decade, and included lots of product placement to get that more authentic 80s movie feel. Now, product placement wasn't anything new in the 80s. We've seen it throughout cinema's history. But like I said, the 80s took it to the next level. And there were two brands that helped propel it to the forefront: Coke and Pepsi. The 80s were a decade where commercialization and subliminal marketing began to have a more widespread influence on the minds of younger audiences. And what better way was there to get kids and young adults to side with your brand than to show it front and center in movies that were considered to be cool? Pepsi was prominent in Back to the Future, and considering the cool factor of Marty McFly, it must have had some influence on Pepsi's sales. Coke was a staple in the Breakfast Club, with its cool and rebellious high school teenagers including it as part of their lunches while spending time in detention. Kids and adults wanted to be the people and characters they saw on the big screen, and having a product be featured in a movie could be a big source of advertising. Thanks for watching. I really enjoyed making this video. Just doing the research for the music section alone left me listening.
Still trying to this day to impersonate those characters,
I was born in the 90s, yet while putting this video together, I couldn't help but get that feeling of nostalgia from the 80s. If you like this video, make sure to leave a like. And what else do you think makes 80s movies feel like 80s movies? If you want to stay up to date on more great movie, Hollywood, and film industry related content, make sure to follow FilmStack. And until next time,
anyways, what do you guys think of that? What do you guys think about 80s movies? Let me know down there in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.